Right now, technically, we're live, so I'm going to hit this real quick. Oh, look. Take it away, man.
Welcome back to the Talking Hedge. I'm Josh Kincaid, and this is your Cannabis Business Podcast. Today, we're going to be talking about vaping. Can it cause lung disease? Also, Illinois, what does it take to get an application? And top 5 cannabis scandals. On the line with us to help us digest all that is the Illinois lawyer, Tom Howard, and host of Cannabis Legalization News. Thanks for being on the Talking Hedge.
Thanks for having me, Josh. I appreciate it.
So top news that got dropped on Friday is vaping safe. We're looking at least 5 deaths due to pulmonary lung disease. There was a pulmonologist in North Carolina who said that some consistencies that they've seen is vitamin E oil, and the lipids that they're using is very similar to bronchitis. And so that kind of raises the question beyond just this black market issue. Is regular dabbing that has high fats and lipids also potentially bad? Legal lawsuits that could happen, businesses that could go under, a lot of ramifications.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, there are a lot of ramifications, but it does seem like it's not the types of vapes that are legitimate. It seems like all the vaping problems have been black market vapes. And Cresco just put out something today about their policy statement regarding it. And if you watch some of the YouTube videos, of course, on the vaping merchants and the ones that are actually making the hardware, typically from China, they'll discuss how heavy metals can leach out into it and the types of materials that they use in the actual cartridges themselves. So there is a combination of different things that can be causing the problem. But I did see the vitamin E acetate explanation, and I had absolutely no idea that if you inhale vitamin E, you're going to have what just presents to be this whole list of terrible, terrible diseases, or lung problems that has actually killed a couple of people, one of which was in Illinois.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, there's not a lot of similarities. There was an FDA representative that said that with all of the cases, there's not a single one thing, even the vitamin E acetate. And so I'm not really sure what the cause is. Ultimately, don't buy a cart from somebody's trunk. Black market is probably not what you want to do. I think it's less malicious than it is ignorance. Herbicide Eagle 20, when heated, turns into a carcinogen. I don't think the people who were growing that cannabis knew that. There's not a lot of malicious intent. People aren't going out and just trying to murder people. But it is interesting nonetheless that it could be, not to throw out rumor mills, but if there is sabotage, it's interesting to create barriers to entry. I made an analogy where Facebook wants to create a barrier to entry, and if you create regulations, whether it's Altria or Juul creating barriers to entry, it's an interesting case. I think there's going to be a lot more regulation as a result of this.
I think there absolutely has to be some regulation, but even vaping, especially the e-cigarette, I think was only invented in 2003. They're exceedingly new devices. And so there's these types of things are going to happen, especially when there is no regulation. And then also there's a large black market demand as this new trend in cannabis, the vape cartridge, which really came about because you have the ability to produce it legally. And then you have the ability to create distillate. And that distillate wasn't exactly easy to make. It took years. I remember when I first got my medical card in Illinois, the first few years, they were not very good. I'd go to Colorado, and then I'd come back with a different vape, and I'd talk to people that I knew in the industry that were making them, and then the quality of it did pick up after a few years. But now that people are out there and they're doing black market extractions, and so you don't necessarily know what type of pesticides or who knows what toxic substances in those leaves as they press them and then concentrate them and then put them into some type of agent that makes it smooth enough so that you can actually vape the stuff. If you look at like a vape cartridge with oil, and its clarity level, it should be really, really clear, but then what's its viscosity level? And that viscosity level is something that then you need to mix in something to that actual extract that makes it more loose substance that can actually then go through that little, I'm not sure what it is, an electric transmitter. It's kind of like a hot plate, at the end, where then it does heat it sufficiently to be vapor.
Right, and that glycol or glycogen gives me a scratchy, irritating throat sensation. So I think a lot of the live resin you're seeing 200% sales increases is a perception that it's more healthy. Although within that cart, like you mentioned, there could be leaching of heavy metals. There's a lot of issues with these carts not being accurate or just toxic in terms of heavy metals. And that's not even the oil. That's just the cart itself. A lot of issues. I know people that are old school hippies that have heavy metal poisoning just from old school gardening and not understanding how to flush a plant properly. And so now with concentrates, if not done properly, if done on the black market without oversight, regulations, proper standard operating procedures.
Or the health and safety inspections that can come in and actually set policy so that purity is respected. But even then, the unlicensed production of cannabis will continue simply because I'm not sure if you saw the numbers out of Missouri. The exclusivity that came from a finite number of licenses, very small, pushes the price up. There was approximately 192 dispensing and 60 cultivation licenses, plus a few other testing and maybe some distributing medical cannabis licenses in the state of Missouri. They got over 2,100 applications because if you win, you're a millionaire. And they know that. And so why not roll the dice and try to win and create the best score? And then the thing is, okay, you didn't win. Well, I guess you could always sell it unregulated.
Well, that's a good transition into how to get into Illinois. So there's a Yahoo Finance article that if you want to apply for an Illinois cannabis store license, you got to start with a list of what to do. So they break it down into like 5 different things on how you should begin. Being an Illinois business attorney, I figured the perfect person to kind of break these down for us. So the first one is to locate a city property for the retail cannabis establishment. Obviously, location. Right. Are you seeing somewhere like where I've seen in Phoenix where a license went for $20 million? Are you seeing specific areas that are commanding more than another?
We can't see that yet simply because we're still in the induction phase and the application's not slated to be released for another few weeks, and that may be delayed simply because of how complex the whole process is. The thing that I am seeing, though, is that there will be communities that will opt out of allowing them there, and so that will create effects of where the actual dispensaries are located, at least in terms of geography. So if a city prohibits it, they might be a dispensary on that edge of that town where it is permitted. Or you're looking at first making sure that the local municipality has zoned you to be able to operate that cannabis business. And then from there, it's like anything else in real estate. Yes, it is the location. So you look at the entire area of where it's allowable and say, based on all of these are good places for us to look. And then you, of course, go and you approach the realtor. But interestingly enough, in Illinois, for your dispensing license, you do not have to disclose an address. You just have to disclose an area in which you want to operate the dispensary. Then you have 6 months in which to disclose the address. And then, of course, another 6 months from that first 6 months to open your doors. So you actually have 1 whole year from the time that you win the license.
A lot more lenient than Washington. You had to have that first. Like any other.
Yeah, I mean, we did have that for our medical round, but then the legislatures determined that it was in everybody's best interest to edit that out simply because a lot of landlords knew that they kind of had you by the cojones, and they would create like, oh, no problem, you can put our name on your application. That'll be a small $10,000 security deposit. And then, of course, the applications, while not to the almost 10 to 11 to 1 ratio that they had in Missouri, went up to 4 to 6 to 1, depending on which area you were trying to get the license in Illinois for medical purposes 5 years ago. So, they wanted to try to bring down the cost to entry. And one of those ways to bring down the cost to entry is to take the landlord out of the equation. You still have to provide schematics and blueprints, under the impression that one piece of commercial real estate is identical to another, which isn't really true, but square footage is square footage.
Mhm. So, second thing to look for is documentation, right? Just like anything, you want to have your documents and organization structure to include anything and everything. But then it goes in to say that also you should consider a social equity program. I know you've covered that on some podcasts. And so
Yep.
what they're saying is that to document the social equity status, to reflect the ownership and management structure, keep all those documents.
Hmm. Yeah, the social equity issue is going to be a sticky wicket to be not even kidding. And the reason why has to be because there's really only three ways that you can get it. And they're mutually exclusive from what I can tell. We do not yet have the rules, but the reason why I say they're mutually exclusive is because they're written in the alternative. And so the first one is 51% ownership and control. Ownership and control is defined in the law to be that you have to, of course, have 51% of the actual ownership of the corporation or the corporate entity, but also then exert control, like in your day-to-day operations of the business. And so finding somebody who would live in a what they call a disproportionately impacted area is impossible right now because there is no map for the disproportionately impacted areas. So there's that problem. And then the second one is a little easier because there is an answer to the question of whether or not you have status of being a social equity applicant. You have to have been arrested or worse for possession of up to a pound of cannabis or distribution with the intent to distribute of up to an ounce of cannabis. So if you have one of those infractions in the state of Illinois, of course, then you are a social equity applicant. The same 51% ownership and control restrictions also apply. Or if you have 10 current full-time employees, which were from number one or number two, then you're also a social equity applicant, which of course, if you're trying to get into the industry and you're putting together a business plan and you need the license before you can open your doors, it really is difficult to fall into that third prong because you don't have current employees. The next thing is Illinois apparently doesn't really preference an Illinois resident too much for its license because it's only worth 5 of the 250 points. But that's not necessary, or like approximately 2%. But that's wrong because the social equity applicant aspect of it is 20% of your score, and only Illinois residents can be social equity applicants. So in theory, 22% of your score is by being from the state of Illinois.
And you need to be there 5 years, which is an eternity in this.
For the disproportionately impacted area, yes. However, the definition of resident for Illinois is an interesting one, and I'm not sure which one applies. It is not defined in the statute. There are tax definitions. There are voting definitions of resident. And also in the there is a resident definition under the personal use area of the statute for if you wanted to move to Illinois to grow your own plants. That's 30 days. So, what does it mean to be a resident of Illinois?
You should ask a business lawyer. I know one.
Well, that's one of the problems. I can give you the answer, but I still have to speculate simply because there isn't an answer, at least officially, when it comes to rules. So Illinois, despite being three weeks away from when we're supposed to get the application and a few months away from when we're supposed to have legal cannabis, there are still a lot of things that we can't answer to our clients. And it's like, well, we're waiting for the state, and I'm sure they're doing their best. It's just it's a difficult thing.
Meanwhile, you're supposed to operate, right? And so that's the funny part in Washington. 5 years on, you still can't just operate. You're constantly working on eggshells, wondering what's going to drop next. And making sure that you have enough financing to ensure operations is critical. So point number 3 on this Yahoo Finance list of what to do if looking for an Illinois license is to create a pro forma that shows how the business will be capitalized and operated in a profitable manner. Again, making sure that you have enough capital to last. So
correct.
I want to say that collecting information that demonstrates that all startup funds are liquid and are from legal sources. The pro forma should be realistic and tied to the overall business plan, ensure that the revenues and costs are realistic given current market prices.
Which, of course, is very, very difficult because when you ask somebody to come up with a pro forma and he's like, I got an MBA. I'm like, well, how much cannabis experience do you have, Mr. I have an MBA, or I have a CFA, or I'm a CPA, or I bleed business plans and, financial statements. Cool. I'm glad that you do that. But how well do you understand the cannabis industry, so that when you put together that pro forma and then we look at your financial projections, we can understand them and say, like, yes, we have confidence in them because they came from this particular source and they do nothing but make these, and they've been in the industry for this many years. Even 5 years, again, is an eternity, but they have a lot of experience in understanding and appreciating how people consume, buy cannabis, and then how, based on the locality of the proposed dispensary, because the locality of the dispensary at the retail level is more important than where the craft grow is. For example, craft grow is more like a commodity you want near a rail spur or some type of easy to transport place. But all those types of things come into it, because I mean, and I'm not going to tell them what their enterprise value of their business is, or how to capital, say like our business is worth X. I'm like, okay, cool. Now let's work on your private offering so that you can go out and raise that X. And they really need to have that business plan before the corporate lawyers like myself can come in and draft them the types of documents that they need to be able to go out there and raise that capital in that type of liquid format that you say.
It's critical to have people on your team who understand that, if you have $1 million and you think that you're going to be able to stay in business and grow weed because it just grows like a weed, there's people on the board who understand that. We've seen people not be able to produce a single gram with $1 million. It's just, you need to have enough, and you need to have people on your board who understand what they're doing.
That's right. The operations issues when it comes to cannabis at all levels. I mean, it's not, you have to have a very good understanding of how the genetics work so you can get a very strong mother. And then you also have to understand how all the cultivars are different, because they all want different types of food, or they all want to be, fed or get aerated different, or the amount of carbon dioxide. And then after they're harvested, how long do you have to hang cure them? How long do you actually have to cure them? How much do you have to burp them? And then, how did you trim them? All those things. There's just so much stuff that people gloss over. And the reason why it's a green rush or any other type of these boom bust cycles that we have, where there's an immense amount of greed into the factor, people tend to kind of skip over all the steps that are required to do the operations to make those types of cash flows. It's like, I get licensed, I'm rich. I'm like, no, you're missing several integral steps, bro. But that's why people, I think, are doing a lot of education on the subject, and trying to how do you standardize practices in an industry that's 3 minutes old?
Mm-hmm. One thing you don't want to skip on is security. So the fourth point in this Yahoo Finance article about how to apply for an Illinois cannabis store license is to create a security plan that incorporates the findings of professional security consultants. Right. Make sure that the security features are outlined on your site plan and include the requirements from the local municipality where the cannabis dispensary will be located. And the security plan should include controls that will be used to ensure the records are safe and unalterable.
Yes. Yes, and those safe and unalterable, a lot of that is digitization, but and at least I know it's for the dispensing. I'm not sure, but it would not surprise me if the other types of cannabis license also need a contract with one of these types of security consultant providers. And it's exceedingly important, because the amount of security that they have built into the cannabis plant, at least in the state of Illinois, is very, very great, as probably even greater than it is in Colorado. Definitely greater than Washington State and in California, because of the amount of surveillance that needs to be built into the systems. Moreover, they have, what is a secure locked facility as they defined it. So, when you, and I was just at the dispensary the other day, they have safes and lockers. I mean, the product, it's not like going to a dispensary in other legal states. The product is not behind glass. The product is in a safe. And so you can't even see the product. You can't smell the product. There are no smell jars. There's nothing like that. The only thing that you're able to do is say, I want this, and then they will give it to you. But you're not allowed to open it. You're not allowed to do anything. All sales are final. And that helps with the inventory control, because then everything's already pre-packaged. And so it's easy to itemize an inventory. You have SKUs even, so you don't really have to say, well, I bought this bulk flower and then we turned it into this many joints, or no, you don't, none of that. But you still need to have those safes that aren't cheap. And then at the end of the day, you need to wheel those safes back into your enclosed, locked facility that is additionally secure. Maybe you have it, made in what do they call those, cinder blocks or something that's just really, really hard to break into.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Well, so the fifth and final to-do list on this Yahoo Finance article for how to apply for a cannabis store license is to read through the scoring methodology and work with your business partners to structure a business plan that exceeds the requirements of each category. The results should be realistic and reflect how your organization can execute and be an asset for the community.
Oh, that's huge. There's a lot of big points for your security, your business plans, your capitalizations, your financials, the way that you train your employees and all that. But then there's a few softer points for your community outreach, and also your diversity plan, your plan to engage the community to help achieve the ends of the law, which are to rectify the harms of the drug war. And those types of things is where you can get really, really creative and try to give back as much as you can to your community. It's one of the things that I've noticed a lot, and the differences between the businesses in the cannabis space from out west and even in Colorado, with the atmosphere of fun and enjoyment that cannabis often imparts, and freedom even. But over in Illinois, it's got like a lot more of wellness. The wellness trend is pretty good because that's a very positive connotation, but it also has a lot of inclusion, a lot of diversity, and a lot of doing the right thing and community empowerment. And so those types of things actually kind of get into the branding in Illinois cannabis relative to when I see other brands in different states.
I'm heading down to San Diego with Jim McAlpine's podcast in San Diego to talk about an active cannabis lifestyle October 10th. So stay tuned.
Sweet.
Hedge for that. But this kind of pivots or transitions into the top 5 cannabis industry scandals as the list of things that we just covered on the Yahoo Finance article of what to do, your checklist. You should be noting how to avoid risk, how to avoid being in the top 5 cannabis industry scandals. So kind of just diving into each one, you can kind of take away what to do and what not to do. Number 1 on the list is CannTrust, the most recent one. They publicly traded on the New York Stock Exchange. Basically, the executives, top-level C-suite people knew that they were growing in unlicensed, unregulated rooms, essentially growing more than they were allowed to. Some of them may end up getting fines. I doubt any of them will go to jail, but plenty of people have been fired and their stock price has taken a hit.
Yeah, and that really stinks because the stock price taking a hit in a cannabis company is not like the stock price of, IBM's been on a tear for forever, just straight down. But IBM is still, relatively speaking, a liquid stock. You can get into GE too. GE just sucks. You can get into and out of those companies, though, because they're quote unquote blue chips. But it can be very difficult sometimes to exit a position when you are in a cannabis stock, even a stock as large or as liquid as GTI or Cresco could probably be very difficult to exit. So I haven't even heard of this person's company. I'm not sure if they have penny stocks on them, but trying to get out of that position might have really hurt.
By the way, GE was just had a 7-month report from the same forensic accountant that was the first person to come out and say that Bernie Madoff was a Ponzi scheme.
Oh, good.
Same individual did a 7-month study and said GE is illiquid and fraud. They're committing accounting fraud. So right now that is just a rumor, but this guy's smart. I believe him 100%. I don't necessarily short equities, but that one would be one on my list.
Yeah, you could have pair traded that with a long of Amazon 10 years ago, and right now we wouldn't be talking in these surroundings. It would be a lot more palm trees that we'd be doing this podcast on. But yeah, you can't really go wrong getting out of GE.
Yeah. So number 2 on the list of top 5 cannabis scandals is Namaste Technologies. I'm not really sure what the deal is. I'm not really familiar with it, but the problems apparently began with promotional event featuring fake nurses in sexy costumes. So that didn't go over well with the quote bro culture. But essentially, there was a short seller attack for some allegations that caused some board shuffling, some accusations that it was planning to list, and then fake claims on the NASDAQ listing. So essentially, the guy that was running around during the Blue Herring 20-day run was selling stock, and he shouldn't have been. So the simple takeaway is that the higher share price was on the back of a false report that he was running around. Kind of reminds me of some other companies right now trying to go public in the market.
They just have, but that gets back to, we just talked about how tenuous and difficult it can be to get a pro forma together for your cannabis startup. And yes, that can continue even up through the chain. And when do you really believe numbers, and how sophisticated are your average investors when it comes to reading the financial statements of these companies or even understanding how accounting practices are? I mean, is GE right now just a cluster of adjusting entries that really make no sense, and then they aren't just doing accrual accounting? They're doing the stuff that Enron did, but on steroids or something.
Yeah. So Curaleaf got kind of busted because they didn't have an arm's length deal. They were selling $900 million deals to previous partners. And that same thing happened with Namaste Technologies. They had a couple $100 million deal with somebody who was, I don't know if he was a board member, but wasn't an arm's length party. So, yeah. Anyways, moving on to Doylan Elements. It's another private company. And this is the same thing where he was running around trying to sell more stock and just pumping up with false reports. You can't give guarantees in the industry, and that's what he was trying to do, is basically just violating registration provisions by engaging in unregistered offerings of securities. So misleading representations, and
so just basically like SEC fraud and stuff. I mean, where you're violating all these types of things that they say don't do. And then this again, if this is an American cannabis company, or was this a periphery, Namaste Technologies, so they aren't touching the plant, and in theory, now I was rejected by a bank recently because they called me a marijuana related business, but as an acronym because it's a bank, MRB Tier 2. And so a Tier 2 isn't actually touching the plant, but they're the next level of vendor. We're selling services directly to the people that are touching the plant. And that got me deked. But I'm not sure if Tier 2 MRBs can actually list on the stock exchange. So was Namaste Technologies allowed to literally get listed on NASDAQ, or did this whole thing blow up before then?
Namaste was private. And so I don't believe that they were planning on listing on NASDAQ. And so that's why he was trying to sell the arm's length deal, is to make it look like there was a higher valuation.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah,
they'll do that. I mean, that's part of the game, because higher valuation usually means more money. And then if they're trying to get to market, why do a lot of entrepreneurs try to get to market? Because then suddenly, in the time that it takes to ring a bell and wait a few hours, you are richer than astronauts. And the only thing you had to do was lie through your teeth and then shop a whole bunch of money, which those investors may have believed, but that is some of them, like Sarbanes-Oxley from 2002, where what did you knowingly say? And that's one of the reasons why, we had a consensus, but we didn't really know anything. Is a terrible defense. However, it's
can't either.
Yeah, I know. That's just the way that capital moves, and that's one of the reasons why you have these types of oversights. But you're not supposed to cook your books. You're not supposed to make your numbers say what you want them to say. You're supposed to make your numbers say what you believe you have a reasonable factual basis for them to say. And that's mostly, there's most fluff and BS before you're actually able to be public, because the amount of reporting requirements that you have to go through after then is substantially more. However, seriously, Beyond Meat is not worth what it is. That it ran up a lot. It's a great, wonderful story. I would short the heck out of it. I'm not sure if it has enough float to do that, but it's not worth the 500% run.
So it might taste good, but I don't know how healthy it is. I've seen hemp versions, and when we tested it, it was really high in sugar. And so if you have this product, it could taste like meat, but if it's not healthy, then even if it's plant-based and number one ingredient is sugar, it's not going to get the traction it deserves. So yeah, I would short it too. I don't think it's going to last. Tradive is number 5 on this list of cannabis industry scandals. Tradive was an e-commerce site out of Colorado. They were a competitor to a company that we were starting up in 2017 called Xylem Marketplace, an e-commerce site started by a software development engineer from Microsoft who developed a Halo video game. And then I met him when he was at Amazon. And we went out and we got 75 LOIs in 2 days. People were really excited. We went up to Alaska and Spokane and Portland and Colorado, got all of these people interested. Never got off the ground. That team got distracted by a shiny squirrel that ran somewhere.
Good.
But Tradive ended up being successful. Problem is they started diverting product and selling it to the black market. So they were scaling up. They were getting really big. I didn't understand how or why. And then it came out where their California team was selling to the black market, and they just had to shut everything down.
That's strange, man. I haven't heard of that, but yeah, there's going to be a lot of tomfoolery in this industry, even with the amount of regulation. And so the amount of the regulation seems like it's really, really high to get in some locations. Illinois is one of them. Missouri is another one, where the barrier to entry is really high. But then you just have to buy the license after somebody won it, if you can buy it. And, they aren't going to look at your... I don't know what they're going to look at, actually, when you try to buy the license, whether or not Illinois will look at whoever's going to buy it is adequately capitalized, or if they just are going to be able to pass the background checks. There's going to be a lot of cannabis M&A, and there's going to be a lot of these companies that will continue to, because the profit margin and motive is so strong, lie.
We saw it up in Canada, too, a publicly traded company. I went up to try and help automate the pre-roll solutions. Publicly traded company, Agroma Botanical, also known as Decent Industries. They're the only company to lose their license. They were publicly traded in Canada, but Health Canada came in, found that they were manufacturing product they weren't allowed to. They did it anyways. Health Canada came back 6 to 9 months later, and the result was that they lost their entire business. So some property, plant, and equipment was sold off, and everything fell apart. Because of why? Because of greed, or because you just wanted to... There was a big bag of cannabis that just had somebody's name on it, like Joe Schmo at some unlicensed dispensary. And then rumors that some biker gang was involved too up in Vancouver, BC. So I don't know anything about that, but I do know that that was a huge scandal. Should have been on that list. A lot of people lost money, including friends and family around. Feel really bad for some of the executives who were in charge, because they bought brand new houses, had babies, thought they were moving in one direction, and then a 180 kind of hit them in the face. Which, that's the lack of oversight. Those 5 things that we listed, where you need to have SOPs and security and all of these things with management that's going to hold you accountable, they didn't do it.
Yeah, and they make these types of things conditional in very competitive, restrictive licensing states, like they're going to be out east and in the Midwest. If you aren't doing those correctly, they can yank your license, and then suddenly, if you did, anticipate you'd have millions of dollars of cash flows going forward because you own a dispensary and they just don't have very many of them, and everything's going to be easy, and you buy all these things, and then you're asleep at the wheel. Boom, it's gone.
Mm-hmm. So with that, we're going to roll this one up. I'm Josh Kincaid. This is a Talking Hedge. I want to thank Tom with Cannabis Legalization News. Appreciate your insight and everything. Hit us back. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe, or don't. And I'm out.